Hey guys, so in this tutorial I will show you how to create this halftone shader here, which gives us this engraved money look, kind of. And yeah, we will create this node group here, and the whole setup is based on this texture here. And this texture can be used to compare any color information against it, and then we can create this halftone pattern. Okay, so here is a fresh new file, and I add a Suzanne mesh, then I add a subdivision surface modifier, and I also want to shade it smooth. Next I toggle to rendered view, and I add some lights. Just a very basic setup here. So maybe like this. And the next thing is a camera. So just a quick test scene. Okay, so now we need to add a material. And I call this halftone. And the first thing we need to do is to create the pattern. So we don't need the principled BSDF for now. And to create the pattern, we need to work with the window coordinates. And we can get the window coordinates with the texture coordinate node. And here, if I look at the window coordinate, you can see what it looked like. So if you look at the separate components, so separate X, Y, and Z, you can see that the X and Y coordinates give us this nice gradient which goes from 0 to 1 for the camera. And keep in mind that it depends on the aspect ratio of the camera. So if we, for example, put in here another ratio, and to visualize it, I can just take a checker texture and look at the window coordinates like that. You can see that it gets stretched. So to compensate this, we can use a vector math node and set it to multiply. And here I can set the aspect ratio, so 0.92 and 1.08. So yeah, so you can keep this in mind, but in my case I want a square camera, so it doesn't really matter. So I don't need this here. Okay, so now to create the pattern. First we need the math fraction node. And before the math fraction, we take a math multiply node. And with this here, you can see that we can create this repeating pattern. So what fraction does is it gives us the decimal point. So here we multiply our value, which goes from 0 to 1. And then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the fraction just gives us a decimal. So it is a repeating pattern of a gradient from 0 to 1, and that's exactly what we need. So yeah, that's the first thing. And to create this wavy pattern, we can work with the X coordinate and simply take the math sine function from this. And if we simply multiply beforehand, we can change here the frequency. And to control the amplitude, we can multiply after our sine function. So just to visualize what we do here, I can take a greater than node and compare our sine function on the x-axis against the y-axis. And if I take the camera maybe like this, you can see it better, because here at the bottom is the 0 line. And so here I can control the amplitude, and here I can control the frequency. So yeah, that's exactly what we need. I can delete this for now again, and then replace the camera. Okay. So yeah, and the trick here is to simply add this sine function to our y coordinate. Let me show you what I mean by this. I simply set this to add and then add this value here. And if I now look at the result, we have this nice wavy pattern. So maybe keep it like that for now. And the next step is to duplicate this pattern, then rotate it, and then add it to this texture here. So I can simply put a frame around this, then duplicate it. And to rotate it, I can use the vector rotate node, and it is already set on the z-axis, and that's exactly what we need. So if I look at this and rotate here, you can see what happens, and just set it at 90 degrees. You can change this later on, but for now it's okay. And now we add these two textures together. And this gives us that nice pattern here. And keep in mind that here we have values which go from 0 to 1, and here we also have these. So if we add this together, we get a gradient which goes from 0 to 2. But we want this in a range of 0 to 1. So a simple way to fix this is to multiply it by 0.5. Okay, so that's the base pattern. And to give it the shading, we can simply take a standard principled BSDF shader or a diffuse shader. Doesn't matter, it depends on your preference. So I work with a diffuse shader. And now I simply convert this shader to RGB with a shader to RGB node. And now we can compare this RGB value against our pattern we have here. And for this, we use the greater than method. And to control the contrast of the overall look, we can work with a color ramp. So here I can adjust it to my preference, and I don't want this total black areas, so I change this value here to gray, maybe like that. Yeah, so looks okay for now. What I don't like so far is that it gives us this triangle pattern, and we can change the shape of the pattern if we simply change the interpolation method of our gradient here. So what do I mean by that? So let me simply visualize that. If I take a float curve and change it here, you can see that we can change the shape of the pattern. But I tend to use other methods. So for example, use the power, and yeah, so we can play with this value here. So let's look what it looks like with an exponent of 2. Maybe 0.5 was better. Yeah, so I like it that way. And again, play with these values here. Yeah, that looks okay. So next thing is I want to create a node group out of this. So this is our base on which we compare our texture. So let's put all of this into a node group. And the layout is messed up a little bit. So like that. Yeah. And then we can call this maybe halftone. And now we can create inputs for all of our controls we want. So here we have the frequency. So I take a group input node and put the frequency in here. Then I name it. The second is the frequency. And I also connect it to the bottom because we wanted to have uniform values. And then I want to control the amplitude. And again, connect it to the bottom. And this here gives us the control over the size of the pattern. So yeah, connect it here and at the bottom, and then rename it. And maybe we want control over the shape. So yeah, you don't need to do this, but let's quickly add this shape. And last thing is to control the angle. Or maybe we want to control both angles, so maybe like that. So this is the first, and then here we control the second. Angle 1 and angle 2. Now both have the same angle, so I put this here at 0 degrees. And I also set the default angle 1 to 0. So yeah. Now we have this nice little halftone node group. And here we can control the pattern to our preference. So maybe like that. That looks okay. And then we can control the rotations of both patterns. Maybe play with the amplitude a little bit, but here we have to be careful to not create a moire pattern. You can see it on extreme values. Yeah, that looks fine. And now I think it would be nice to shade the background too. And for this we can go in the world shader. And here I simply say that we want a gradient in the background. And again, a simple way is to take the window coordinate and take its y component, so separate x, y, and z. And here we have it. Then with a color ramp I can adjust this gradient a little bit. So maybe a light gray at the bottom and an even lighter gray at the top. And now if I take the node group, the halftone node group, it should give us a nice result, yes. And remember to set these values to the same like we used in our object. So I simply copy, where is it? There it is. I for now simply copy it and paste it here. And now we should have the same values. Yes. Okay, so looks nice, but there is a little problem. It isn't obvious, and it depends on if you want to describe it as a problem, because yeah, it might work, but sometimes it doesn't. And the thing is that our sky texture here at the moment lights our model. So to visualize it, I can, for example, change this here to a pure white, and you see that the shading changes depending on these values we have here. And to prevent this from happening, we can use with the light info node, or light path node it is called. And here the camera ray gives us an information about where the rays of our world shader are used. So the is camera ray simply says that the world should only get rendered on our camera, and our object should not be affected by that. And for this we can use a mix shader node, then use this here for the texture, and the is camera ray for the factor. And I have to reorder it again, so like that. And here we can control the strength of the environment. So yeah, just keep that in mind, that if you do it that way, that the halftone world shader might affect your overall shading of the models you use. So back in our material, we can enter the node group, and let's say we want to color this. We can use a mix RGB node, use this for the factor, and here at the bottom we can control the highlights. So let's say we want a beige, yellowish look, and for the shadows we want a dark green, maybe like that. Yeah, that looks okay. So to be consistent, we can change the output to color. So yeah, and of course we can create inputs for these two colors here too. So like that and like that, and that already looks quite nice in my opinion. But I think it is a little bit too perfect. So for my taste, it would be nice to give this pattern slightly imperfections. And a neat little trick I do so often is to distort my texture coordinate with a noise texture. So let me take a noise and add this with a vector math node to my window coordinates. And here you can see that it gets distorted, and now it looks kind of psychedelic. And to control the strength, we can work with the vector math scale node. And the noise at the moment is pretty large, and we want it to be very fine, so we put a pretty high value in here. And then we only want a slight amount of distortion. This is already too much, maybe 0.003. Yeah, maybe change the noise again, and then increase the strength. So yeah, maybe like that would work. So yeah, that's the base shader, and I think you can improve it a little bit with a few other techniques. And yeah, maybe we can create an input for the noise in our node group. So noise scale and noise influence. Let's name this quickly. Noise scale and noise strength. Yeah, so we created the neat little halftone node group. So that's it for today. I hope you've liked this tutorial. And if you want, you can download this file on my Gumroad page. I put the link down below, and there you can simply download the node group, maybe improve it a little bit, and use it in your own projects. So yeah, see you next time.